Now I would like to give some explanation about the procedures for etiquette used in Daito Ryu. You may have noticed some slight differences in the ways I and Amano Shihan across from me just bowed to one another. To explain these, in nearly all cases except when bowing to your own teacher, you first extend your left hand, followed then by the right. This is because as you bow you are making a mental check of the safety of the situation, protecting your right hand, which you would need to draw your sword, from being cut. So you put your left hand out first, and then, after having judged your opposite to be a non-aggressor, you place your right hand down. Then you execute the bow simply by bending your elbows and then straightening them again. Then you follow the opposite procedure, withdrawing first the important right hand, then the left hand. This is the normal way to bow in almost all cases. There are two exceptions, however, which include bowing to your teacher and bowing to the shinzen, that is the Shinto altar in the front of the dojo. In both cases you put both hands out at once to indicate the relationship of implicit trust that you already have. In bowing like this you indicate your respect and trust of the other person. This is the reason for the differences in the way Amano Shihan and I have just bowed to one another. You will also notice that both of us have placed our swords at our right sides as opposed to at our left sides. This is because in traditional thinking, placing your sword to your right side would allow you to draw it at any time. Therefore, to indicate that you have no aggressive intentions, you put your sword to your right, where it was less easy to draw. The first group of techniques studied in Daito Ryu Aikijujutsu are named the Hiden Mokuroku. The Hiden Mokuroku curriculum contains a total of 118 techniques, which are divided into 5 sets numbered Ikkajo through Gokajo, or Set 1 through Set 5. Ikkajo, Nikkajo, and Sankajo have 30 techniques each, while Yonkajo has 15 and Gokajo has 13, making a total of 118. Each of the 5 sets has a distinct technical emphasis. Ikkajo, for example, emphasizes breaking your opponent's balance at the moment of contact. Nikkajo emphasizes attacking your opponent's joints. Sankajo blocks attacks using an X-block configuration leading into wrapping-type joint locks. Yonkajo emphasizes attacking the inside of the opponent's wrist, and Gokajo emphasizes attacking the opponent's fingers. So, now let's take a look at some of these techniques. First, I'll demonstrate the characteristics of Ikkajo, starting with the technique Ippondori. As you can see here, I break his balance the instant we come into contact. Once more. Next, Gyaku de Dori. In this technique, the opponent comes to grab the front of my clothing, and as his grip begins to close, I shift and break his balance by striking him under the chin and elbow. Next, Kuruma Daoshi. I break his balance completely as soon as we come into contact. Not like this. You should never do this. Because I break his balance at the moment of contact, I have to enter. Or if I'm not in time, I can also move around like this. In all cases, I break his balance right at the moment of contact, and not later. Slowly now. At this point, the opponent's energy and momentum is in a yang, or positive state. This is because his attack is already in full motion. So I shift a bit, and to that energy I add my own yang, or positive energy. and in that way break his balance. So, in this way, the most important element of ikkajo is this instant unbalancing action. Now let's look at the techniques emphasized in nikkajo. Here the opponent attacks and I respond by taking him into a wrist lock called kotezume. Next, shitozume. Here again I used another kind of wrist lock. Moving on to sankajo, or the third set, I respond to his attack with a cross block. Stopping the attack like this differs from the rule in ikkajo, where we learn to break the opponent's balance instantly. In sankajo we stop his attack, or rather we stop it just for a moment, but then as quickly as possible take his arm into a balance-breaking wrapping type control called makizume. One important point here is to make a right angle of his arm and apply pressure enough to make his heels rise off the ground. This method of starting from a cross block and moving into a wrapping type control is the emphasis of the sankajo set. Next is yonkajo. While in sankajo we block like this, in yonkajo this block is reversed with the hands in the opposite way. In sankajo the right hand is on top and the left on bottom, but in yonkajo the right hand is below, palm up, and the left hand is on top, palm down. At this point you control the opponent at the inside of his wrist and forearm and use this control to throw. Here we use the inside of the wrist to throw. This is the technical emphasis of yonkajo. Finally, in gokajo, we emphasize attacks to the opponent's fingers. This is one possibility. Here is another. This is a yonkajo technique, but it foreshadows other techniques in gokajo that use the back of the wrist to attack the opponent's fingers, like this. In this way, the distinguishing characteristics of sets 1 through 5, or ikkajo through gokajo, are clearly identified. The first 3 sets of the Hiden Mokuroku, that is, ikkajo through sankajo, are further divided into 4 types of techniques. These include seated, standing, half-seated, half-standing, and rear techniques. In Japanese, these are called idori, tachiai, hanza handachi, and ushirodori. Idori techniques are done while seated against an attacker who is also seated. Hanza handachi techniques are done while seated against an attacker who is standing. Tachiai techniques are done standing against an attacker who is also standing. And finally, ushirodori techniques are those done against an attacker who attacks from behind. Idori techniques are distinguished by the fact that you are sitting on the floor and therefore are limited in the amount you can move and shift your hips. In particular, you have no way to lower your center further than it already is, since the floor is in the way. Idori techniques are therefore designed to give you practice compensating for these limitations. They also require a precise study of how to apply aiki in such a situation. So now let me demonstrate a few techniques that illustrate the body movement and application of aiki used in idori techniques. When the opponent strikes down at my head, in terms of body movement, my best option is to move my hips forward and break his balance at the instant of contact, like this. Another technique is shitozume. He comes to take my wrist. At that point, I apply aiki like this, just as his grip begins to close. Particularly important is how I use my little finger, or the edge of my hand. Just as he grabs, I drop my center internally and turn my hand slightly to apply the technique. For the purposes of illustration, I'll do a technique which actually is not in the Daito Ryu basic curriculum. This is Hanza Handachi Ippondori. In other words, sitting, doing Ippondori against a standing attack. Back in the Edo period, I'm sure there must have been some situations in which a standing attacker would attack a sitting opponent. Probably this sort of thing doesn't exist now, but the same physical relationship would be true when dealing with a much taller opponent. And for that reason, I think practicing Hanza Handachi techniques has uses even in modern times. As you can see, if I try to do a normal Ippondori, inevitably the difference in height makes it impossible for me to break his balance at the moment of contact. I can't enter in time or deep enough. But what I can do is take advantage of his attacking energy, shifting to let it pass, and then coming around behind, adding my own energy to his, to take control. In shitozume too, allowing the opponent to complete his attack in a stable, solid position, for example by extending your hands like this so that he can grab without bending down, this gives him the advantage. Many people do this in similar techniques and extend their hands to the opponent, but I teach not to, since it puts you at a disadvantage. Instead, allow your opponent to break his own balance slightly, as he will generally do. This gives you an opportunity to then amplify the unbalance and apply your technique. While Idori techniques are done more or less on a flat plane, Hanza Handachi gives your opponent the advantage of being able to move in the vertical dimension. You have to make up for this with timing and technique by looking for and attacking weaknesses in his otherwise advantageous position. Now let's take a look at some tachi-ai applications. As I said, Idori involves movement mostly on a single plane, forward and back, and from side to side. Since you're sitting, you can move your center upwards but not downwards, and in this sense, Idori techniques are quite limited in their range of possible movement. Tachi-ai, on the other hand, allows you complete freedom of movement in your hips and center, and so many of the standing techniques take advantage of this fact. At the moment we come into contact, I break his balance. It's not necessarily a specific hand position or movement that must be done here. The point rather is to figure out how best to break your opponent's balance, and also how to affect the position of his joints, using the movement of your hips and the shifting of your body. In this technique too, you can see that the key points are how to use your hips and the movement of your hands in order to apply aiki. Ushido dori, as the name suggests, deals with attacks coming from the rear. One of the main reasons to practice this kind of attack from the rear is to train your power of discernment, perception, and prediction, that is, the ability to sense what is going to happen before it actually does happen. Ushido dori is not just techniques against attacks that happen to come from behind, rather it is the practice of these deeper kinds of skills, of perception and intuition. By doing this kind of practice, you learn how to sense and intuit your opponent in his position using all 5 senses. You have to consider this kind of sensing as an integral part of Ushido dori technique. This is the inherent meaning in Ushido dori training, and without attention to this kind of thing, there will be little point in practicing it. Ippon-dori is one of the most representative techniques among the 30 techniques in the Ikkajo set. It is a technique that ultimately practices dealing with an attack using a live sword, striking down from an overhead position. In our practice, our opponent uses the blade of his hand to indicate the cut with the sword. Therefore, because you have to think of this hand as representing a blade, blocking like this would not be effective. Even in the empty-handed technique, you would be overwhelmed by his power, so you have to break his attack before this point, like this. Then, to the area that would be open in a traditional suit of armor, I execute a thrust with what in reality would be a dagger. Today we simply indicate this dagger using a fist with the middle finger knuckle raised. At the same time, I also control his arm by keeping a firm grip on the vital point just below his elbow, like this. Then, without raising my hips, I bring him down under my center. It's important that I bring him all the way down under my center, completely. If I don't, he'll be able to stand up and counterattack. So it's essential to break his posture completely. Then, targeting the vital point under his arm, I turn and kick through his side, as if I want to kick all the way through. Then I continue pinning him by applying pressure to the outside of his wrist as part of the pin. Then I execute a finishing strike, making sure that my hand is fully open and above my head. This hand position represents the use of a short sword. Next, the ura version of ippondori. I make use of my opponent's ki, that is, his attacking energy. Essentially, I take his yang or positive energy and absorb it into my own yang movement to control it. I let his aggressive energy go past without trying to block it, and use that energy to turn him down and around. I let him pass and turn him down and around like this. As always, the important point is to unbalance him at the instant of contact, no matter what technique I'm using. Once again, he strikes to my head, and I bring him down and around. Now let's look at this same technique, ippondori, done against a sword cut. This technique is done against an opponent trying to grab your two wrists. As with all of the other techniques, it is essential that I unbalance him at the instant we come into contact. Another important point is that I not put my hands out for him to grab. Instead of putting my hands out, I make sure always to keep them at my sides near my own body. This allows me to apply aiki at just the right moment. That is, just when he comes to grip my wrists. I break his balance, then keep him in that state while I make what would be a cut across his midsection and throw. I should also mention that in doing this technique I am loosening my grip a little bit so that he can take a fall safely. As I showed, just as he grabs me, I apply aiki to unbalance him. I keep him unbalanced all the way through. At this point, pressure is being applied to these three joints all at the same time, and if I continue to do this, I think they would break or dislocate. For that reason, I loosen up a bit before throwing so that he can fall safely. If I were to throw with all three of his joints locked like this, some or all of them would be completely dislocated. So I loosen them up a bit. As you can see, I loosened the pressure on all of his joints as I threw him. Now, as I did with Ippon-dori, I'll demonstrate Daito Ryu's Shihonage using a sword. Daito Ryu actually contains a number of different Shihonage techniques, or patterns, and I'll show just one of them here. We start in a seigan or mid-level stance. When the opponent lifts his sword to strike, I enter. I enter pressing in and in with an application of aiki, and then I release that aiki and turn to cut through the middle. Then I raise up and cut down with a diagonal cut, like this. I apply aiki, then move across the opponent's midsection, turn and raise up as if with raising a sword. Across, up, and cut down diagonally. Across the middle, up, turn, and cut diagonally. When he raises up, at that instant I enter, which is the same as applying aiki here. Then with aiki applied, I move through, breaking his balance, turn, raise, and then I loosen the grip for safety as I mentioned, and cut down diagonally, throwing. This is of course only a kata or a form, so it probably looks rather stiff and rigid. In actual application, of course, this kind of technique would have much more flow to it. This technique is one from the Idori section of the Nikajo set. When the opponent comes to grab your wrists, you perceive this and immediately launch a distracting counterattack. This is not sen no sen, or preemptive initiative, but rather go no sen, or reactive initiative. The opponent is already making his attack and you are too late, so you apply aiki using this kind of movement. I distract him with a strike across his eyes, and take hold of the back of his hand like this, placing the edge of my hand straight across the back of his so that it forms a right angle. Then I turn his hand over and bring him down to the floor, in such a way that all his weight falls onto the line of his arm. Then, with him immobilized in that position, I deliver a finishing strike. While this is a very simple technique, I think it has a great deal of depth, and so it is one that needs to be practiced carefully and with clear attention to detail. When the opponent comes to strike down from above, as with a sword or other blade, we enter in empty-handed to avoid the attack and take him down. The key here is to time your movement to coincide exactly with the instant he is putting his foot down, and sweep his foot at that moment. Then with my right hand I use my knuckle to strike the inside of his knee. At this point, I use my knuckle to strike this as I sweep. I put these two motions together. Then I turn his leg over immediately so that he can't kick. Then I put a final strike to his groin. unbalance him with a very large movement and throw with a small movement. You've already taken his balance here, and using a large movement like this to throw will let him regain that balance and possibly counterattack. So you must unbalance him with large movement and throw with a small one. One point all of these techniques have in common is to continue the unbalancing motion throughout, and this is very important. If you don't, you leave openings for him to attack you. Continue unbalancing from here, and then, keeping him in that state, throw. I'll show this also from the perspective of ippondori. You can see here how I keep unbalancing him all the way down. Another important point, in addition to keeping the unbalancing effect happening, is that the effect of your technique must also continue all the way through. In this case, I'm applying pressure against the outside of his wrist and also locking his elbow joint. I keep unbalancing him and keeping the pressure on this joint so that the effect is continuous. Even as I withdraw, I still have pressure on the outside of his wrist. So to reiterate, a proper technique continues to unbalance the opponent all the way through and also continues to affect and manipulate him from start to finish so that no openings are ever left. For rear techniques, I have to develop so-called eyes in the back of my head, using all 5 senses to perceive my opponent's aggressive intention the instant it occurs, and intuit what he is doing behind me. Then I lift up my elbows to break his hold, and in that way float him upward and forward. From there I use my other hand to trap his hand against my chest, and keeping it pinned there, I take him down into a joint lock. I finish with a kick to his side. With my left hand, I pin his hand to my chest, raising my elbow, then turn my arm and shoulder over to bring him down, taking him into a wrist lock, which I apply by cutting with my little fingers and pressing with my thumbs. As suggested by the name Daito Ryu Aikijujutsu, Daito Ryu is a jujutsu or grappling style that involves the use of aiki, and for that reason I would like to take a look at the meaning of this aiki. One definition of aiki is how one disrupts the opponent's balance. Exploring how to break the opponent's balance is, I think, the first aspect of aiki that we study. There are various attacks against which to practice aiki, but let's start with a single-handed grab to the wrist. He grabs me here. And at that instant, just as his hand is about to close on my wrist, at that point it's important to have already unbalanced him. The moment he touches me, just as he gets to me, I break his balance. In this case, the opponent leans over, putting himself slightly off balance, and you take advantage of that momentary state by moving your hands like this. If you extend your hand, he can grab it from a stable position, so keep your hand down here, in this position. Then use the momentary opening to unseat his balance. At this point, then you can go into any technique you want. This kind of entering is also aiki. And so is this. Right as he grips, I turn my hand, turning my thumb and little finger so that my fingers point toward his eyes. This allows me to apply aiki effectively, turning the thumb and little finger. Without turning the thumb and little finger, his arm will simply bend, so I use the turning of my hand to make his arm straighten. You can do the same when he grabs both wrists. Turn the thumb and little finger on both hands to unbalance him, then throw.
Hey!